Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Jim Tamm, former judge, author, and an expert on building collaborative workplace environments. Welcome to the show. How are you, Jim?
I'm doing fine, Chris. Good to be here. Thank you.
It's really nice to see you because it's so weird when I watch a TEDx or a TED Talk and then I get to chat to the person who's in the video. So I feel like spoiled to have you on the show today. So thanks so much for joining. I really enjoyed it and I watched it again today. For everyone listening, we're also going to be talking about your recent book, Radical Collaboration, 5 Essential Skills to Overcome Defensiveness and Build Successful Relationships as well. But I know I gave a brief intro, but for everyone listening, tell everyone a little bit more about your personal background and journey to where we are now, because it's fascinating.
Okay. Well, after my college degree, my initial college degree was in industrial management. And then I went into the corporate world to work for the General Electric company in HR, actually, for a number of years. And then left there, went back to law school, became a lawyer, worked for the state of California, worked for the federal government for a little while, and then the state of California, and then did some administrative work as a regional director of a big agency, and then eventually became a judge. Did that with my jurisdiction being collective bargaining disputes. So it was all workplace kinds of conflict. I did that for about 25 years, then retired from that. Now I teach in a number of programs. I teach at the International Management Program at the Stockholm School of Economics, the Leadership Academy at the University of California. And over the time, I've taught at Santa Clara Law School for a little while, and Harvard's Talent Development Program, and some MBA programs in Latin America. And
just a few things.
Yeah. So now pretty much I teach other consultants how to teach collaboration skills, work mostly in large global, very high-end leadership programs. That's the things that I do most.
Where did this fascination with collaboration come from?
I always loved being a neutral. In my background, which is labor management stuff, you almost always either have to represent labor or you represent the union, the management. And you don't get to go back and forth, and you tend to have to take one side or the other. And I always loved being in that middle where I could say, well, in this case, this one's right. In this case, this one's right. And so just being able to have that flexibility and not have to follow some dogma just fit my personality very well.
Mm-hmm. Is it frustrating as well to see that as a lawyer, as a judge, as a member of society, to see that battle back and forth constantly?
Well, I felt like I could do a lot of good by helping people solve those disputes. When I see what's happening in politics today, that's frustrating for me because I think it's worse now than it's ever been in my lifetime, at least in the U.S. It certainly is. So that kind of stuff frustrates me because I don't feel like I could have much impact over it. But on the disputes that I used to get involved with, I much preferred to be doing the mediation work than I did trials. I mean, I enjoyed trials and writing decisions and things like that. But where I felt like I really offered a lot to the parties was when I could help them settle a dispute.
You talk about radical collaboration. What's radical collaboration? Why use that word?
Well, when we were first advocating this, and remember, this was back in the late 1980s, the level of collaboration that we were advocating for was pretty radical. People weren't talking about collaboration back in those days. So that was part of it. And then the other part was organizations that could do what we were trying to teach them to do. If they were successful at that, the results were quite radical too. Now, 20 years later, the basic collaboration skills, they're not just a skill that you need to thrive. It's a basic survival skill, because organizations have realized you cannot compete externally if you can't first collaborate internally. So it's changed over the years. What we were advocating early on has now become more accepted. And it may not seem quite as radical. It's more of a, you have to be able to do this in order to survive.
Yeah. We spoke beforehand, though, before the show. I think there's still many organizations that still operate in that old model, even ones that I left before I started this company, where it's that internal battle where you're kind of encouraged to compete against each other. So it hasn't changed everywhere, of course. It's still...
Well, it's like you look at collective bargaining disputes and labor management stuff. I mean, the system itself pits the two parties against each other. You look at sales. I know you have a sales background. How many organizations will tell their salespeople, we want you to work together to support each other, but
so
by the
rare.
way, your annual bonus is going to be based entirely upon your own sales. So, how much time are you going to put in supporting one of your competitors, even if they're an internal competitor, if they're inside your own company, and you should be helping them.
Mm-hmm. Let's jump into the skills, because a video I saw of yours many years ago, which really helped me, was where you spoke about the 5 skills required to build collaborative environments. And I found that so useful as a man. I think when I first became a manager, I came across that.
Well, we found that looking back, we didn't see this in the very beginning, but looking back over it, it appears to us that there are 5 key skills that are absolutely essential if what you want to do is build a more collaborative environment, or you simply want to get better at building collaborative relationships just as an individual. And it's both a mindset and a skill set. It's a set of attitudes, and it's a set of competencies that you can learn in a reasonably short period of time and apply immediately. The first we call collaborative intention, and this is more the mindset. This is having the ability to stay focused on mutual gains in your relationships when you hit one of those speed bumps in the road. When somebody makes a mistake, does something that you don't understand, can you stay curious, or do you get furious? So we call that staying in the green zone, and staying with a collaborative mindset. The second skill is openness. We've learned over the years that it's just so important, if you're going to have people working together effectively, that you can increase the level of openness within that organization. There's been a lot of research by one of my mentors, a fellow named Will Schutz, and also some new research over the last 5 years or so from Google, showing the importance of creating an open environment. Google was trying to figure out how they can create high-performing teams. And they're one of the most data-driven companies in the world. So they picked 180 of their own teams to study in great depth, and they studied everything you could think of about these teams. If you could think of it and there was a way of measuring it, they measured it. Things of gender balance, age balance, experience level. They looked at things like, did they go to lunch together? Did they socialize together? And after 2 years of studying them, they realized almost everything that they looked at, they could do just as good a job picking a team by throwing darts at a dartboard. But there was one that was so much more important than everything else, and that was a high level of psychological safety, which is basically people feel safe enough to raise difficult issues and deal with them directly. So that's that. If you can create that environment where people feel psychologically safe, that's crucial. The third skill we call self-accountability, which is being aware of the choices that you're making on a regular basis, because a lot of people think that by not acting, they're not making a choice. And a lot of people feel that they have no choice, particularly in organizations. They're told what to do and they have to do that. So when we go into an organization, if we can get employees in that organization to increase the level of choice they feel they have, what's their belief system about how much choice they have? If we can get them to increase that, it's very empowering, not just for the individual, but for the organization as a whole. The fourth skill we call self-awareness. This is particularly important to be able to increase your self-awareness about your own defensiveness, because nothing undermines effective collaboration more than people getting defensive. If you're trying to solve a problem or build a relationship and you start getting defensive, it's like pouring blood in water to a shark. It's going to create a feeding frenzy. And then the fifth skill is being able to negotiate your way through conflicts that are inevitable in any kind of an ongoing long-term working relationship. If you have a long-term working relationship and you don't have any conflict in there, it's probably not as productive a relationship as it could be. Either that you're not paying attention or you're overly medicated or, for some reason. But there's bound to be some conflict there. So it's good that you're able to negotiate your way through that in a way that's going to support the relationship rather than undermine it.
What impact does defensiveness have on your sort of mind and body physically and chemically? Because there's stuff going on, right, when you become defensive.
Yeah, there's a physiological, biological aspect to defensiveness. And what happens is part of our prefrontal cortex, just our brain shuts down and we end up getting tunnel vision. So you just can't possibly be as creative when you're getting defensive, because we're putting too much energy into self-preservation than we are into problem solving. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people get a better understanding about what defensiveness is about, help them realize when they're getting defensive at an earlier point in the process, and then come up with some steps that they can do to try to minimize the damage that their defensiveness is creating.
Yeah. Something you said which really shocked me was when you talk about it's the fears that we have ourselves. Like you talk about the 3 fears. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. 3 big fears that come up all the time are fears about our own significance, our competence, and our likability. When I was a judge, I almost never had to deal with pure legal issues. And all of these disputes were involving employees and workplaces. The reason somebody was before me, either from the company or an employee, but the reason they were before me is because somebody started feeling vulnerable and then they got defensive. And when they get defensive, our thinking becomes rigid, our IQ drops about 20 points, and we simply become stupid. And not only are we terrible at solving problems there, but when we get defensive, we tend to invite everybody else in the room to get defensive too. And then what you end up with is a whole room filled with people who are defensive and can't solve a problem. In my background, the technical term for that was litigation. It varies a great deal. I was given a speech at the International Agile Alliance, which is 2,000 or 3,000 software engineers there. And I was asking them, so what do you call a room filled with these people who get defensive and can't solve a problem? What's the technical term you'd use for that? And the term they came up with was software that really sucks. So it's going to vary, a great deal depending upon the circumstances. But every organization, every team, every project has a defense budget, just like every country has a defense budget. And that defense budget is the amount of time and energy and resources that we lose or that we waste because people are getting defensive. And they get protective, they're not thinking well, they're not solving problems very well, they're not supporting each other. So defensiveness is a real key. And if we can get people to be more aware of what their own defensiveness is about, that's a very big deal. Just doing that alone is a very big deal.
Yeah. How do we recognize when we're getting defensive or when someone else is getting defensive? What's some of the sort of key indicators?
Well, first of all, let me talk about what's happening when we get defensive. See, most of us think that we're getting defensive because somebody has done something to us, and so we need to protect ourselves or defend ourselves against that other person. That's not what's going on when we're getting defensive. Now, there are bad people out in the world that we need to defend ourselves from, and you have to be good at doing that if you're going to survive. That's not what I'm talking about, though. I'm talking about when we get defensive, what we're doing is we are defending ourselves from fears inside of us that we don't want to feel. That's where I come back to the significance, competence, and likability, So let me give you an example. Say I have some fears about being competent enough to do this program. I was flying back from Europe last night. I'm jet lagged. Say I'm forgetting things. I'm taking things out of order. I'm stumbling over my words. Nobody's enjoying this. Nobody's getting any learning out of it. Now, that could cause me a lot of discomfort because I hate feeling incompetent. All right. But one way that I could reduce the level of discomfort that I have about my own fear of being competent to do this is I might start blaming you or the audience. After all, these aren't the smartest people I've ever worked with, probably. They're just people that are tuning out of work to, hang out on your show because they don't like what they're doing or whatever. I can make up this story. And I think that I'm defending myself against them. But what I'm really doing is I'm behaving in a way that lets me stay unaware of that fear. So what can be more helpful for most of us, since the fears are unconscious, and most of us aren't aware of that until the damage is already done. So what we try to do is we try to help people become more aware of their outward behaviors, because these outward signs of defensiveness are usually much easier to spot at an earlier point in the process. So for me, for example, I notice that when I start getting defensive, I tend to be breathing faster, talking louder, and oftentimes I'll feel very misunderstood. So if I'm in a room and I'm getting some feedback and I notice that I'm talking faster and louder and breathing faster and feeling, kind of put upon, since I know those are my signs of defensiveness, the alarm bells can go off, ding, ding, ding. Hey, Jim, pay attention. You're doing that thing again. So what we try to do is we try to help people see what their signs of defensiveness are. And we've got a list of about 50 different signs. I'll just give you a few of them here. Loss of humor, high charge of energy in the body, sudden drop in IQ, this just going stupid, flooding with information to prove a point, teaching or preaching, shaming or blaming, withdrawal into deadly silence, trivializing with humor, mind reading, which is, I already know what you're going to say, so you don't even have to say it, magnifying everything or minimizing everything. So if we can help people pick out what their top signs are, they can create their own personalized early warning system to tip them off when they're getting defensive. Then they can take some action, but they have to spot it first.
What's the process look like?
Well, we typically have people go through this list of 50 signs and pick out their top 3 that they're so good at they could teach at Harvard University themselves if they wanted to. It's helpful to have a conversation with your colleagues.
Yeah, about to say, they probably know better than you, right? Because it's unconscious.
Yeah. So, go home and ask your spouse or your kids, how do I act when I get defensive, And we found that family members are remarkably willing to help out on that exercise, and usually very accurate too.
That finally someone's asking.
Yeah. We invite people to do some emotional archaeology, to go back, look at conflicts that they've had in their life and see what the common threads are, see what their behaviors were in those situations. And then they can put together that early warning system.
Even when you was reading some of those out just a second ago, I was identifying some of my own. Yeah. just in those for you. Do you said that? Yeah, they're pretty common.
This is a human condition too. So it's not like we're going to have, I have people who say, no, I never get defensive. And, they have the defensiveness. It shows up as denial rather than their own defense system. Mm-hmm. But it's going to happen to everybody. So, just spend some time trying to figure out how you behave when you get defensive. Write it down, put it on a note, keep your eyes open for it, be on the lookout for it. And then, then you have to move into the next step, which is, what do I do about it?
Yeah. And so it really is a muscle you can build.
Yeah, you can pay attention, you can practice, you can increase your awareness. And the best time to practice dealing with your defenses is when you're not defensive. Because the worst time to do it is the worst time to figure out how to deal with your defensiveness is when you're defensive, because we're just not as competent then, So be on the lookout for this early warning system that you create, and then practice some action steps that you can take. Practice it ahead of time. So when you see that behavior, you take this action and it becomes automatic. See it, do it. See it, do it.
So it's kind of like a role play that you can do yourself?
Yeah. It's a several step process that we try to teach people. One is, recognizing that there are some physiological, biological aspects here. When we start getting defensive, our brain starts shutting down and we get this tunnel vision. So if you can do something that's going to actually re-engage your brain, and there's a lot of different ways of doing that. One is to slow down your physiology. Take a few deep breaths. Take a walk around the building, get some fresh air, go into the bathroom, splash some cool water in your face if you can. If you're in a meeting and you can't do anything, just take some breaths, and no one has to know what you're trying to do, but slow down your physiology. Then there are some little tricks you can do to try to re-engage the brain. Like look around the room and see how many different colors you have in the room. There's a plant over there, there's green, there's a yellow magic marker, there's a black coffee cup and a green book, those kinds of things. Just doing something simple like that. Or how many different sounds can you hear in the room? I hear the air conditioner, I hear the car outside, I hear my computer. Just doing that will help re-engage your brain. Right? So that's focusing outward. Then what you want to do is you want to focus inward to try to see if you can figure out what that fear is. And the three biggies that I mentioned were fears about your significance or your competence or your likability. That's a little harder. So sometimes people, at least when they're first starting out, they haven't practiced this. Sometimes they can't do that in the moment. So we say, well, come back to that later on after you're out of that situation and you're not feeling defensive.
It's hard in the moment to do that, right?
Absolutely. That takes some practice, So you try to figure out what the fear is, right? And then you try to create some kind of an action step that's going to have an impact on what your signs of defensiveness are. An action step, for example, if you're flooding with information to prove a point, might just be to be quiet for 10 seconds. Just shut up, Now, that's not going to help you if your sign of defensiveness is withdrawal into deadly silence. Then what you need to do is you need to speak up, maybe tell them you're getting defensive, ask a question to buy yourself some time. If it's high energy, maybe you do some kind of a meditative process. If it's a sudden drop in IQ, maybe you go hide in the bathroom for 5 minutes to let your brain catch up with the rest of your body. So there's a lot of different strategies that you can do depending upon what your particular sign of defensiveness is. You also want to pay attention to what your self-talk is. A lot of time, people will have some very negative self-talk when they get defensive. And if you're going into a meeting with this little dialogue up in your head saying, this isn't fair, I'm going to look stupid, I don't know what I'm talking about, they're going to fire me, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to starve to death, my kids will starve, that isn't going to help you at all. So pay attention to that self-talk and consciously try to turn it into something that's less toxic for you. Maybe it's just like, yeah, this is an uncomfortable situation, but it's only a 45-minute meeting. I've done it before. I can do it again. Let's go. All right. So you implement your action plan, you pay attention to your self-talk, and then it's helpful if you can let it go. It's not to your advantage to keep beating yourself up. You want to have some compassion for yourself because getting defensive is a human condition. We're all going to get defensive. It's going to happen. Don't beat yourself up for it. You have to take some action, try to deal with it, and then move on, let it go.
What's the impact of conflict, defensiveness on the organization itself?
If you have an organization that doesn't do well at collaboration, they're not going to be very creative. They're going to be wasting a lot of time on conflict, not dealing with it in a productive way. It can be an enormous drag on the productivity of that organization and the individuals in there. I mean, if individuals are working in a hostile, adversarial, conflicted environment, they feel different every day when they go to work than an organization where employees feel empowered, they feel heard, they feel listened to, they feel safe, they're not fearful. The attitude is just night and day there, and it shows up over time in the bottom line. Having organizations focus on those particular skills, we were able to reduce the amount of measurable conflict, the things like number of unfair labor practice charges or requests for mediators or fact finders, things where we had a 20-year history, very good records to show both before and after we were teaching these skills. So we could compare both before and after. We reduced the amount of measurable conflict in almost 100 different organizations by almost 70%.
Wow.
It saved the state of California a huge amount of money, so much so that the state legislature created a nonprofit foundation to keep offering this to the public sector.
Because they knew how much the impact is going to have already.
Yeah, I mean, it made a difference. And so there's just been a huge amount of research to showing that a collaborative environment will generally, over time, kick the butt of a more adversarial environment.
Yeah.
And that there was one of the more famous research studies was done by two professors from Harvard, Cotter and Heskett. And they looked at, they started with over 200 corporations. They were all listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And so they were big global companies. It was from 22 different industries, so it wasn't industry specific. They picked organizations that had clearly defined cultures. One was a more collaborative culture, one was a more adversarial or conflict avoidant culture. And then they compared them over 11 years. And the net increase of the increase in the net income of the collaborative cultures went up 756%. The net income of the less collaborative, more conflict avoidant or more adversarial ones went up 1%. A 755% difference over this 11-year period. Just, a massive difference in the success of those organizations.
Yeah, definitely. I want to talk briefly over the concept, because you've described this as sort of the red zone, the pink zone, the green zone. Yeah. And it was really great for me as a visual to sort of bring it all to life. Could you just talk on that quickly? Sure. And obviously we can discuss briefly, how do we stay in the green zone?
Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, when we first started looking at the impact that culture has on an organization, we saw a range of behaviors. At one end was this more adversarial, highly conflicted type of workplace that we call the red zone. And the other end was this green zone, much more collaborative, where the red zone is adversarial, green zone is collaborative. But then over the past maybe 10, 12 years, we've seen a lot of people who say, well, we're in the green zone because we don't fight. If there's a problem, I just keep my mouth shut. I keep my eyes down and my mouth shut. And they were mistaking the absence of outright warfare as an indication that they were good at collaboration. But really what they're talking about is simply a more conflict avoidant, passive aggressive culture. So it's just a lighter shade of red, a different shade of red, that's why we started calling it the pink zone. So we have this adversarial red zone, deep red. We have this conflict avoidant pink zone, and then the green zone over here. And yeah. I find that the majority of our clients today, in fact, I think it's probably the majority of organizations today, are more pink zone than they are red zone or green zone.
One of the questions which came up when I was speaking to even my own team actually about having you on the show and a few others is, how do we measure this?
Well, we have a survey that we use. It's called a Collaborative Skills Climate Survey, where we ask questions like, do people hide mistakes? Do they reach out to try to collaborate with other people? Do they make their interest in collaboration known?
This is the individual answering, right? I'm answering this from my perspective.
This is the individual saying, what do you see in the
what do you see in your organization? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. It's a pretty good indication. It's a great diagnostic tool. And typically organizations that are suffering from collaboration, oftentimes they don't quite understand what the problem is. They just know it's not working as well as they want it to. And so if we can do this and we can come up and say, well, look, people are hiding mistakes here. People don't feel safe enough to be as open as it's going to be helpful, or people don't know how to negotiate their way through. That when they're trying to solve a problem, they don't work to try to solve the other side's problem as much as they try to solve their own problem. You got to do both if you're going to have an ongoing successful resolution there. And so it gives us an idea of which of these 5 skills they're strong at, which they're weak at. And so then we can, get a better idea of what we need to do to resolve that.
How long does that take? Just out of curiosity.
It's 71 questions. It only takes 20 minutes to fill it out, to fill out the survey. But so once we get that idea, then it depends on the size of the organization.
Sure.
And, if you're talking about a single team, typically we'd work with a team for maybe 3 days, giving them the new skills, letting them practice, letting them apply it to work, to their real situation. And man, it can have a huge impact immediately. They go back to work on Monday and it's a different situation. It's a different team there. Obviously, if you want to roll that out in a big organization, it takes a lot more time because you have the momentum. And so you need to have a critical mass of people that have those new skills. And because people typically are not taught how to be good at collaboration. I mean, when I was in college, I never had a course like that.
It's true, because most of the time, as I said, it's unconscious. We don't even know that we're doing these things. Yeah, even just throughout this conversation today with you, I've learned so much stuff about myself in the examples that you've been given. I'm like, I do that. Yeah. So it's just, we're unaware. This is yeah, you're right. Who's done a course on collaboration before? But no wonder.
If we can get people to the point where they can talk about that in their organization. If they're in the middle of a meeting and someone says, hey, I have the feeling we're getting a little pink zone here and no one is saying what's really on our mind. No one is willing to speak up and say, this is a really bad idea because we don't want to offend each other, that kind of stuff. If you can get them to have that conversation.
And they have the language.
Yeah. And they have that common language, or they have the security that somebody could say, wait a minute, I've just missed what you said. I'm getting a little defensive here. Can you go back and say that again? Maybe use smaller words, pretend like I'm 5. And that leads so often to burnout. Yes. Burnout for the group or the individual, and it's not like the antidote to burnout is rest. The antidote to burnout is passion. And you don't get passion from protecting yourself. You get passion from feeling supported and jumping in and saying, let's do some creative things here. Let's try to solve these problems in different ways. That's when people really get alive. And that's when you see the productivity shoot up at that level.
Yeah. Well, Jim, I feel like we need a part 2 because I've only got halfway through my questions, but I know I've got to let you go at some point. But thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. And I love the work you're doing. I just really wanted to share it with our listeners. I think so many people listening right now can benefit from the work that you do. So thank you for everything. Before I let you go, where can people check you out, learn more, grab a copy of the book, etc.?
Yeah, there's a lot of information on the website, radicalcollaboration.com. So you can go there. The second edition of the Radical Collaboration book has just come out a year ago. So that's available. You can get it on Amazon or any order it from a bookstore or anything like that. Those are probably the 2 best ways that you can find out more about radical collaboration.
Amazing.
Or you can email me, Jim Tamm at Radical Collaboration too, and I'm always happy to answer any questions or anything like that.
Fantastic. And for everyone listening, all those links are already in the description. So click in the link in the description, go there now. Also, make sure you follow Jim on LinkedIn as well. And I also would plug your TEDx talk. I really enjoyed that. The story about the chicken. Yeah, it sounds crazy for everyone listening, but the story about the chickens, it was a fantastic story. Really kind of brought it all to life, and so many great takeaways from that. So.
If you go to the TED and you just put in my name, Jim Tamm, or Jim Tamm Defensiveness, you'll get to that. And that's only 14 minutes. So
it's on Jim's website on the homepage, so you can go there as well. Yeah. So, well, look, I'll let you run, but get some rest after a long travel. And I look forward to chatting to you again soon, but it was a real pleasure. Thank you.
I'd like that very much, Chris. Thank you so much.